If Jesus were here in person and you had a birthday party for one of your family members this afternoon, there's a good chance he'd be there unless he had to be somewhere else. Jesus wasn't someone who stood aloof. He was among the people. He was with the people. Jesus lived as a man among ordinary people. We might expect him to be only hobnobbing with the kings and the rulers of the day, the leaders, or maybe the ultra-wealthy, or whatever we might imagine. Jesus was with the ordinary people. He lived as a man among ordinary people, but beloved, he was no ordinary man. In fact, he is a man on a mission for the Heavenly Father. When they ran out of wine, Jesus' mother came to him expecting him to fix the problem. Now, we assume that she was expecting him to make some wine. You don't have any wine? Well, just, Jesus, make some. Just make some. But we don't have anything to suggest that she would have thought in those directions. What she would have thought, though, is that she had known Jesus now for 30 years. And he was the son that she could always count on to get things done. When there was something that needed done, Jesus got things done. Jesus never made a promise that he would do something that he didn't keep. He never said that he would be somewhere that he wasn't. He never promised to clean his room and didn't. Mary knew she could always count on Jesus to fix the problem. And Jesus speaks to her not as mother, but as a woman. And he says, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? What to you and to me? Why is this any of our business?" Well, I don't want to speculate too much, but it says that Jesus and his disciples were invited to the feast. But Mary was already there. And I can just imagine that Mary had seen that Jesus was starting to gather some disciples around him. By now, if he had John, he probably had 5 disciples that were going around with him from place to place. And I could just imagine, that Mary might have said something like this. My son Jesus, he's getting started in the ministry. And I bet he would make a really good guest for you guys. Said this to the master of the feast, or perhaps a bridegroom. And maybe the master of the feast would have said, "Well, yeah, you're right. It'd be great to have your son here. Why don't you invite Jesus and his disciples to come?" Well, she did. And now there are all of a sudden 6 more people at the wedding feast. And so maybe Mary is feeling a little bit like, okay, this is 6 people who they weren't planning on. And I've been to enough covered dish dinners and meals at the church that I know that one thing that you ladies do not like is to run out of anything, right? To not have enough food, not have enough drink. And somehow we always do. But I can expect that maybe Mary was concerned about that. Maybe she felt like, well, maybe it was just a little bit her fault that they ran out of the wine. But Jesus is telling her, He wants her to know, He says, my hour is not yet come. What's He saying here? He's saying the time for me to present myself as the Messiah has not yet come. And when did He do that? He did that at the triumphal entry, right? His triumphal entry into Jerusalem on the week of His crucifixion, when His time truly had come. But He was on a mission from the Father, and He was letting her know that what He did had to be on the Father's timetable and in the Father's way. You'll recall when He was 12 years old there in the temple. He said, didn't you know? He said, why'd you seek me? Didn't you know I would be about my Father's business? And so I'm sure Mary probably remembered that at this point. But his mother, Mary, she knew, didn't know what Jesus was going to do, but she knew that if she said something, Jesus was going to do something. So His mother said to the servants, whatever He says to you, do it. Well, in the providence of God, Jesus saw a way to fulfill the request in a way that served a kingdom purpose. And that brings us to the miracle. Verses 5 through 10. Let me just read these again. His mother said to the servants, whatever He says to you, do it. Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. And Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. Now, I just can't pass this one over. They didn't do the job halfway, did they? Jesus said, fill them up, and they filled them up to the brim. And He said to them, draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. Now, this master of the feast would have been a person who was appointed to kind of make sure that everything was being taken care of. It wouldn't exactly have been an MC like we think of at weddings today, or a DJ, certainly not. But it would have been something perhaps maybe like a wedding director or a wedding planner, but someone who was going to make sure that everybody's needs were taken care of, and that the food and the drink and all of that was organized. So they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, doesn't necessarily say when the guests were drunk. I'll just let you take note of that. But when they have well drunk, when their taste buds perhaps were not as sensitive as they would have been at the beginning, he says, you've kept the good wine until now. So what can we notice about this miracle that will help us to understand a few things? And the first thing I would have you to notice is that the miracle used what was available. The miracle used what was available by using the stone water pots, and by using the servers at the wedding. He used what was on hand. These large stone pots, 20 or 30 gallons apiece, they were made out of stone, not out of pottery, because pottery may have had some impurities in it and would have rendered the water for purification inside, it would have rendered it unclean in the ancient Hebrew system, according to the law. So they would have been stone pots, and they were for the purification of the Jews. Now, this doesn't mean that they were being baptized in these pots or anything like that. What they would do is, it was a requirement of the law that they would wash everything. Now, before you get to thinking, now they must have been really conscientious